In the Mario series, there are a lot of random species allied with Bowser, let's face it. Many of them are very recognizable, like Goombas, Koopa Troopas, Boos, and I wanted to get some information on how they were created, or if there were any interesting facts I could gather from these minions. A lot of them don't have it, I'll be honest, but it's worth doing this video anyway. Collectively, they've gone by many different names over the years, like Bowser's Army, Koopa Troop, Koopa Corps, Team Bowser. So this will be similar to my video about the Kongs, where I'll go through the most prominent members of this army, and hopefully you'll learn something along the way. I'm TheMentok and welcome to Origin Oracle. Shout out to my new editor Alex, link to his channel in the description. And with that said, grab a snack, relax, and let's head back in time. So let's start off with the very first enemy you encounter in the Super Mario series.
Goomba!
Funny enough, Goombas, or Little Goombas as they're originally called, were the last enemies that were designed in the development process for the first Super Mario game, created by the developers to give the players an enemy that could be defeated with just one jump. They're introduced in the manual as former residents of the Mushroom Kingdom, at one point living in peace with the Mushroom people. But at some point, I guess tensions grew high and led to Goombas betraying the citizens of the Mushroom Kingdom and joining Bowser's army instead. The name Goomba is derived from the Italian slang word Goomba, originating from the word Koompa that traditionally means an associate, but this word apparently has different connotations depending on who you ask. Italian immigrants in America would often refer to each other using the word Koompa as a term of endearment, and of course, non-Italians flipped it into a derogatory slur.
Disappointed!
And this is why we can't have nice things. Takashi Tezuka, who at the time was one of the designers and artists for the project, and Toshihiko Nakago, one of the programmers at the time, revealed in an Iwata Asks segment that by the time they came up with Goombas, there was barely enough space left for the game cartridge. So instead of coming up with a unique moving animation for Goombas, they made it look like it was walking just by rotating it from left to right. Nakago explains that's why the Goomba's body slopes slightly. Alex, slow down that animation and enhance. You all notice what they're talking about here? I didn't see it, so maybe when I watch this video back, I'll be able to tell. Alex, don't disappoint me. In the same interview, Iwata asks if it was a coincidence that the Goomba looked like a mushroom, to which Tezuka responds, it's a shiitake mushroom. And this answer surprises Iwata with him responding, so it's not a chestnut? This brings us back full circle to the Japanese name for Goombas, Kuribo. No, not that one. Throughout this video, I'll be referring to many of the original Japanese names for Bowser's army, since most of them are pretty different from what we're used to. And it reveals some interesting things about these species. But Kuribo literally translates to chestnut guy, which is why Iwata is somewhat surprised that they were based on shiitake mushrooms instead. I recommend you all track down these Iwata Asks segments as they have a ton of insight on game design, but they also serve as a more intimate experience with major players at Nintendo. And I can't move past this segment without saying rest in peace, Satoru Iwata. Not just a former Nintendo CEO, but a Nintendo legend.
On my business card, I am a corporate president. In my mind, I am a game developer. But in my heart, I am a gamer.
So Goombas have been ingrained in the Mario series ever since and can always get stomped out in one jump. It's also implied that they have a cousin species called Goombos that seem to be an exclusive to Sarasa Land in Super Mario Land. Here's a no context picture of them with Tony the Tiger. In Japan, they named this version Chibibo, which is a combination of the word chibi, meaning small, and Kuribo. And in Super Mario World, another species of Goomba called Galoombas, or Koribon in Japanese, make their debut, having a more defined chestnut shape than normal Goombas. Goombas, of course, are not restricted to Bowser's army and have served as a friendly species in other games like Paper Mario and Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, where Goombario and Goombella serve as party members and allies to Mario throughout the events of each game. I could make a whole video on Goombas alone, but I'm committed to my mission to get through these, so let's move on. Koopas! Or more specifically, Koopa Troopa, which can be more or less described as the primary type of minion in Bowser's squad. So while these turtles as we know them were introduced as Bowser's minions, they actually originate further back in the 1983 arcade title, Mario Bros. They were enemies known as shell creepers, turtles that were roaming the sewers of what I'm still guessing is New York. Though in this game, Mario and Luigi can't jump on the shell creepers, you have to bump the platform below them to flip them over first, before kicking the shit out of them while they're on their back. I find it interesting that many remakes of this game replace them with Spinies instead. So Nintendo went on to create the Super Mario series, and Koopa Troopas served as the main foot soldiers for Bowser. This time Mario can jump on them, causing them to duck into their shell before being able to kick it away into other enemies, or in later titles, pick up the shell to throw at obstacles or enemies. And leave that comment below if these shells used to backfire on you all the time in your childhood. In Japan, Koopas are known as noko noko, a term meaning to walk unconcernedly, which is definitely what they do in these games. Alex, pull up their sound effect. You can actually hear the noko noko part in their sound effects, right? Am I going crazy? I just discovered this while I was recording. In English, this name was derived from Bowser's Japanese name, Koopa, which comes from a Korean dish of the same name. And this was the name picked for Bowser among 3 Korean dishes, and I go into this in my Bowser video if you're interested in learning more about him. Similarly to Goombas, Koopas aren't all known to be soldiers for Bowser, with unique friendly Koopa characters being established within Mario spin-offs, and even in the mainline games like Super Mario Odyssey, where they serve as hosts for minigames. You could say there are multiple species of Koopa, especially among Bowser's ranks, but most of them will get their own segment within this video. Which leads me to Boom Boom, a larger, more muscular version of Koopa that serves as a henchman of Bowser. Now it's up in the air whether there are multiple Boom Booms out there or if he's his own character, but to keep things simple, I'll go with the latter. Boom Boom has served as a boss in many mainline Mario titles, debuting in Super Mario Bros. 3 for the NES. And his name is Boon Boon in Japanese, which is probably the closest name I've seen so far. Boon Boon is the onomatopoeia in Japanese for something shaking violently, which in his case is his arms. And he's even been featured as a playable character in a few spin-off titles as well, and has become more prominent in recent games. In 2011's Super Mario 3D Land, Pom Pom, a female counterpart to Boom Boom, was introduced. And much like Boom Boom, Pom Pom serves as a boss encountered frequently throughout Mario's adventure, originally throwing boomerangs at Mario and spitting in her shell when she's damaged, much like Boom Boom's attack style. In Super Mario 3D World, she becomes a whole-ass ninja and throws shuriken at Mario instead, which hopefully remains as her fighting style from now on. In Japanese, her name is Pun Pun, which is an expression for angrily, and in Spanish, it's Pum Pum, but don't Google that. And shout out to my Jamaicans out there that have a new appreciation for this character. Next up is the Koopa Kids, not to be confused with the Koopalings. I also have a video about the Koopalings if you missed out on that one. The Koopa Kids only appear in the Mario Party franchise, most of the time as non-playable characters, and they're first seen in Mario Party serving as the henchmen of Bowser on the final board of the game, Eternal Star. So in the first Mario Party, you have to play all the other boards and collect at least 100 stars throughout the game to unlock Eternal Star. Bowser will steal all of the stars you've collected, and you'll have to challenge the 7 Koopa Kids on the board to get them back. Originally, these guys were known as Baby Bowsers until it was ultimately changed to Koopa Kids in Mario Party 4. So of course, their relationship with Bowser has been brought into question. And similarly to the Koopalings, you'll find the same non-answers. The Japanese name for the Koopa Kid is Mini Koopa, which, if you directly localized it, would just be Mini Bowser. The European version of the game actually went with this name instead. The original description of the Koopa Kids in the Japanese version says, Koopa-sama no bunshin, which could roughly translate into a couple things like Bowser's kid or Bowser's other self. But Nintendo left the interpretation a little unclear. By Mario Party 7, the Koopa Kids refer to Bowser as Mr. Bowser in some of their quotes. So once again, I think Nintendo is just writing these things off as more of his henchmen. It's just Mario Party though, so I wouldn't even think too hard about this. Boos! Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Boos are another pretty recognizable enemy in the Mario series. Quirky ghosts that can mostly be found in the Ghost House theme levels throughout the franchise. Alex, play their Mario 64 sound effect one time.
As you wish.
Okay, now slow it down, like a lot. Okay, now play Bowser's laugh from 64. I hope I blew everybody's mind a second ago. Shout out to the original video that did that. They debuted in Super Mario Bros. 3 with the original name Boo Diddleys, which is a reference to the rock and roll star Bo Diddley. Much like the rest of the series, Boos would freeze in place, covering their face when Mario looks in their direction. But once he looks away, they proceed to hunt him down. And while they're mostly depicted as a round white ghost figure, their face has changed pretty often over the years. But I think Nintendo has finally decided on the look that they're sticking with. The Japanese name for Boo is Teresa. I learned not too long ago too. But this name came from the word tereya, meaning a very shy person. And to add to this, it was revealed by Shigeru Miyamoto in the Japanese 1996 edition of Nintendo Power that Takashi Tezuka's wife inspired the creation of the Boo character. They describe her as a normally shy and quiet woman until she got pretty angry with Tezuka arriving home late from work. So they designed an enemy based on this idea. I can't imagine the conversation this led to. Hey honey, guess what? We created this enemy based on your hot-cold temperament. Ha 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 ha. Funny enough, the interviewer asked Tezuka about this. Quote, "How does your wife feel about this?" To which he only responds, "She knows." So she's probably still upset to this day. So while boos can be associated with Bowser, they're pretty much their own thing, and this is especially apparent in Paper Mario, where they introduce Lady Bo, leader of the Boos in Boo's Mansion. These Boos are a more neutral group, and Lady Bo herself would join Mario on his quest to save Peach. Boos would become a mainstay in the Mario franchise and would also be the main antagonists within the Luigi's Mansion series, with King Boo leading them all. First appearing in Luigi's Mansion for the Nintendo GameCube in 2001, King Boo more or less has a vendetta against Mario and Luigi, and attempts to lure both brothers to him so he can exact his revenge for all the Boos they've attacked in their various adventures. Mario ends up going first to investigate and gets captured in the process, kicking off the events of the game as Luigi wields the Poltergust 3000 from Professor E. Gadd to capture all the Boos and rescue Mario. King Boo from this point on would be featured as his own unique Boo, with many appearances and Mario spin-offs. He even makes a cameo in the recent Mario movie attending Bowser and Peach's wedding. Okay, let's move on. Next up is Bloopers, and I feel like dodging these things is like playing 4D chess sometimes. These underwater enemies have been around since the very beginning and were originally described as a sentry that chases stubbornly after Mario. In Japan, they are known as gesso, which comes from the Japanese word for squid tentacles. And in the West, their original name was Bloopers, until Paper Mario would shift the name to Bloopers. There isn't much else to say about these things aside from them being one of the most annoying items in Mario Kart, but they're always around, so I figure it would be weird if I excluded them from the list. But you often see these guys paired up with another pretty common enemy, Cheeps. These pufferfish enemies also populate the waters during Mario's adventures and come in many different colors and sizes, and despite their occasional peaceful nature, they're implied to also be a part of Bowser's army. Unlike Bloopers, you can defeat Cheeps by stomping on them when they jump out of the water. Miyamoto would come up with the name Puku Puku for this enemy, based on the onomatopoeia for sinking or rising while giving off bubbles, a sound often associated with fish. Now I can't track down how they localized the name to Cheep, but I imagine they went for a similar type of name based on a sound effect. According to Miyamoto in an interview with Famitsu, he was considering the name Techiri based on a particular seafood hot pot dish. There are also Big Cheeps, which are exactly as the name suggests, but interestingly enough in their first appearance, the names were localized as Boss Bass and Big Bertha, even though in Japan these are considered the same enemy. Bob-ombs, one of the enemies first introduced in Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic before being adopted by the Mario series. So technically these are minions of Mamu, who would later be a minion of Wart before finally this species of living mechanical bombs began working for Bowser. These enemies famously ignite and walk toward Mario and the gang with the intent of blowing them up, but if you jump on them, you can just pick them up and start throwing them at obstacles or other enemies instead. In Japan, they're simply known as Bobu, or Bob, while other titles have referred to them as Bomuhei, meaning bomb soldier. Much like other enemies we've covered, we see more friendly versions of Bob-ombs in Paper Mario titles like Admiral Bobbery from Thousand Year Door or Bobby from the Origami King, both of which become your party member at some point in the game. Like the Boos, there is a King Bob-omb as well who debuted in Super Mario 64 as the major boss of Bob-omb Battlefield. He's implied to be the leader of the Bob-ombs in a few of his profiles and has made a few appearances after Mario 64, like Mario and Luigi Paper Jam as the boss of Mount Burr stage. And yes, he was also invited to Bowser and Peach's wedding in the movie, even though it doesn't take him very long to fall asleep. He blows up at one point in the movie. You guys think he's canonically dead? Also in Doki Doki Panic, there are a couple of other enemies that were brought into the Mario series, like Sniffits, Pokies, Ninjas, and probably the most popular of the bunch, Shy Guys. Excluding Birdo from this list since she got her own video, so feel free to check that one out. Shy Guys, similarly to Bob-ombs, were first introduced as members of the 8-Bits, Mamu or Wart's group, depending on which game you're playing. And it's said in the manual that he wears that mask because he's shy, hence the name.
That's what the point of the mask is.
The Mario Mania guide describes them as wandering zombies of the world of Subcon, which make them sound a little bit creepier in my opinion. But they would go on to mainly be featured as enemies within the Yoshi franchise more than Mario games. But they are definitely a part of Bowser's army in a majority of the Mario and Luigi games. So, is this a mask or their face? This is yet another Mario detail that's been debated but doesn't have much of an answer. But look no further than one of Shy Guy's animations in Super Mario Strikers Charged, where he trips and the mask falls off. Unfortunately, we can't see what's underneath it, but if this is a mask, why do the eyes close when they're sleeping in Yoshi's Island DS? In Japan, they're called hey-hos because that's apparently how Bowser greets them. That was a spicy joke. Hey-ho actually is a jumbled version of the word ho-hey, meaning foot soldier, and it's probably meant to have double meaning as a greeting in English. But shout out to the Portuguese for going with the name mosquito. I think that's a cute one. Bullet bills. They're just big living projectiles that are easily dodged most of the time. I had to include them just because of their Japanese name, Kira, aka killer. I don't know, that's pretty badass. They do come in larger sizes as well, a variant known as Bonsai Bill, which has a much more intense look on its face. And of course, overseas, they went with the name Magnum Killer. Miyamoto explains that at the time, shark mouth art was very popular on the noses of fighter planes, and putting the same art on a cannonball is kind of killer. That's why they were called Killer from the beginning. I'm reading this from Google Translate, so it's hard to tell whether Miyamoto is actually describing them as killer or using the slang killer to describe them as badass. I'm gonna assume the latter. Chain Chomps, the dogs of the Super Mario franchise, kind of. These spherical enemies bark like aggressive dogs and are pretty much designed as ball and chains with teeth. This would be another enemy that Miyamoto cooked up, inspired by a traumatic childhood experience where a dog attempted to take a bite out of him before its chain held it back. In Japan, chain chomps are known as wan-wan, the term for a dog's bark, which could translate to bow wow. Now, my facts are bleeding into another franchise here, hint hint, but chain chomps make a few appearances in the Legend of Zelda series. In an interview in the official guidebook for A Link to the Past, published by Shogakukan, the interviewer asks, by the way, there were several characters in A Link to the Past that also appeared in Mario. Was that your idea, Mr. Tezuka? With Tezuka responding, we'd had concept art for Bow Wow lying around for a while. We'd put it aside thinking we might make use of it if we could, but someone discovered it and ended up using it for their own purposes. This heavily implies chain chomps were originally intended for Zelda, but someone nabbed the concept art and used it for Mario first. You can also find chain chomps making an appearance in The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening with the name Bow Wow, and this was like my favorite part of the game, saving a kidnapped Bow Wow here and getting to take him for a walk while he swallows your enemies whole. Dry bones. Even when they're dead, these Koopas still have smoke for Mario. My headcanon is that these are all the Koopas from the past that Mario has assassinated. And while you can jump on these things, they disassemble into a pile of bones before slowly coming back together to continue their haunt. Dry Bones can be found as a playable character in many Mario Party titles, Mario Kart, and Mario sports games, and I think the trophy from Super Smash Bros. For 3DS says it best. They must have a bone to pick with Mario. No matter how many times he stomps them, these guys put themselves back together again. Can't they just rest in pieces? By the way, have you noticed how nimble they are in Mario Kart? Skeletons must be really aerodynamic or something. Nintendo would even take this concept of an undead Koopa and apply it to Bowser. This is Dry Bowser, first appearing in New Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo DS. Dry Bowser makes his debut when Mario literally kills Bowser at World 1, when he drops him in a pit of lava. And you could argue Mario has done this before, but it's kind of wild to see them take it this far. In Japan, they call this form Hone Koopa, or Bone Bowser, and this form would become popular enough for them to feature it in Mario Kart, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, Mario Tennis Open, and a few other titles. Actually, let's dedicate this section to the other Koopas in Bowser's army, like the Hammer Bros, a staple in the Koopa troop since the very beginning, and these elite members of the army do exactly what their name suggests, throw hammers. And personally, I think under pressure, these can be one of the most difficult enemies to take down or avoid if you're not paying attention, in the 2D Mario games at least. This is probably why so many people stuffed their Mario Maker levels with like 100 Hammer Bros and called it a day. While there seem to be many of these Koopas under Bowser's employ, their original descriptions describe them as twin brothers, which would explain why most of the time you'll see them in pairs. Their Japanese name is Hanma Brozu, which would make this the first enemy I've covered so far that has their name unchanged. And there's quite a few variants of this enemy too, like the Sledge Brothers or the amazing Flying Hammer Brother from Super Mario World, which as a child gave me the most anxiety. So much so that I'm just now realizing that this thing they're wearing wasn't a Santa outfit. Am I the only one that interpreted it that way? Speaking of anxiety, Chargin Chucks, also known as Buru or Bull in Japan, a massive Koopa that wears football gear. This enemy first appeared in Super Mario World and would camp out near the goalpost most of the time to either hunt down Mario or make sure that he robs you of Yoshi before you complete the level. So screw anxiety, this enemy actually used to scare me because not only is it faster than most enemies, this thing can take a few hits before it's finally dead. And in Super Mario World alone, there are several variants like Lookout Chucks, Splittin' Chucks, confused Chucks, passing Chucks, digging Chucks, but me personally, I'm more of a clapping cheeks fan. Alex, tell me, did that joke slap? Anyway, leave your favorite Chargin Chuck in the comments below. Sumo Bros get a mention because while they haven't appeared in many Mario games compared to the others, they bear a similarity to Chargin Chuck, and arguably Boom Boom. But they first appeared in Super Mario World and have the ability to create thunderbolts when they stomp their feet, which ignites into a bunch of flames on the floor below. In Japan, they are simply known as KK, an abbreviation that doesn't seem like it was addressed until 2020 on the release of Paper Mario: The Origami King. Mario's traveling companion, Olivia, tells him that the KK stands for Kaminari Kyodai, or Lightning Brothers. Did Nintendo really sit on this information for 30 years? Lakitus are best known for sitting in the clouds and chucking other enemies called spikies at you. Originally, they were introduced as the mysterious turtle who controls the clouds, and in Super Mario Bros. 3, they added the ability to kill this enemy and steal its cloud, allowing you to sail through the skies for a limited amount of time. To this day, this is still one of the most rewarding experiences in the franchise. In Japan, Lakitu is known as Jugemu, which comes from a popular folktale about a father who goes to a temple to ask the priest for a good name for his newborn son. The priest provides several auspicious names to the father, Jugemu being one of them, which results in the father choosing all the names for the baby, and his name ends up being Despite all that, the Jugemu part can be interpreted as limitless life, so I'll leave that up to you guys on deciding how that applies to Lakitu. As for how it got its English name, that's somewhat unknown, but the best speculation I've seen comes from Twitter user James Montagna, who says, "The story I've known is it's a jumble of Tukwila, a city in King County, Washington. Considering proximity from Nintendo of America, seems not too unlikely." When pressed further on his source for this, James promptly disappeared, but I figured this was worth mentioning regardless. Later on, Lakitus would be featured as the cameraman following Mario all throughout Mario 64, and to this day is the one holding up the traffic light that initiates the start of each Mario Kart race. But next up on my Koopa list is Magikoopas, whose naming conventions are going to be a little confusing. But these magical members of Bowser's army were introduced in Super Mario World as one of the more elite members. As their name suggests, they are magical Koopas that can vanish in thin air and reappear before using a spell to transform blocks into enemy reinforcements. So in Japan, they are known as Kameku, or Kamek, which is a combination of Kame, the word for turtle, and Magiku, or magic. So localizing the name to Magikoopa was a good move, but when Yoshi's Island came out, we were introduced to a specific Magikoopa named Kamek in English. And it's implied that Kamek has been serving as an advisor to Bowser ever since Bowser was very young, so most of the time he's depicted as a high-ranking member of this army. Though mostly given the spotlight in the Yoshi series and Mario spin-offs, Kamek can be found in the beginning of Super Mario Galaxy, attacking Mario with magic to send him flying into space. In Japan, all of these Magikoopas are referred to as Kamek, so are all the Magikoopas we see throughout the series just Kamek popping in to fight Mario? It's another one of those things that you don't think too hard about, because there are definitely instances where there are multiple Kameks on screen. But there are also variants of Magikoopas as well, like this boss Kamala from Super Mario Galaxy, who's essentially Kamek in a purple dress, but once again, the Japanese version barely differentiates, naming this one Boss Kamek. In Paper Mario and Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, a character named Kamikoopa takes up a similar role to Kamek, serving as Bowser's main advisor throughout the events of the game. This particular Magikoopa's appearance is the most distinct, going with the more traditional witch look in appearance. And look at that, she has her own name in Japanese as well. Kamekubaba, a combination of Kamek and Baba, meaning old woman. Unfortunately, she hasn't been seen since Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, with Paper Kamek taking her place in future titles. And while Kamek does make an appearance in the Mario movie, voiced by Keegan-Michael Richardson,
Behold, the king of the Koopas!
his name is never mentioned, but they do include him in the credits as Kamek. So I guess we will continue referring to anyone that we think isn't this character as just Magikoopa. This list is kind of long. Alex, are we doing okay? Good, because breaks weren't in our contract. Piranha Plants are one of the most recognizable enemies in Mario, to the point where it got its own fighter slot in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. But from the very beginning, Piranha Plants can be found chillin' in green pipes, waiting to take a bite out of Mario if he times his jumps incorrectly. This is another enemy that I think can fall outside of Bowser's jurisdiction, but I wouldn't be too surprised if he strategically placed these things to impede Mario's progress. Its Japanese name is pakun flower, coming from the onomatopoeia paku paku, used to describe chewing or biting motions of the mouth. And these enemies would eventually have the ability to spit fire as well, and by the time Nintendo got to Super Mario World, the primary color of these plants shifted to red, and even started jumping out of the pipes. PD Piranha, also known as Boss Pakun, is a rather unique variant of Piranha Plant that debuted as a boss in Super Mario Sunshine, under the rule of Bowser. He's been shoved into every Mario spin-off you can think of since then, and not much is known about this massive plant, but his profile in Mario Superstar Baseball says that a mutation created this boss of Piranha Plants. So is he considered their king? My favorite Piranha Plant appearance to this day is that bouquet that Bowser presents to Peach for their wedding day in Super Mario Odyssey. I think that's a nice touch. And then finally we have the Thwomps, introduced in Super Mario Bros. 3. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these things serving the one purpose of trying to smash Mario. Pause. This was another enemy people loved throwing everywhere in Mario Maker. Anyway, these things are indeed a sentient giant stone face, and majority of the time are invincible to damage, so all Mario can really do is time his run right and avoid them. The Japanese manual for Super Mario World describes Thwomps as a stone obake that Bowser set up in castles and forts, which gives us an idea of what inspired them in the first place. An obake is specifically a type of yokai or supernatural spirit in Japanese folklore that are known to transform or shapeshift. So if you've ever seen the trope of a fox being able to transform to trick people in the context of Japanese culture, apparently Thwomps are cut from a similar cloth. So while they don't exactly shapeshift, they are living supernatural stone beings that serve to trap Mario. The Japanese name is dosun, the sound used to describe heavy thumping. So I'd say Thwomp was a pretty good choice too on the localization end. And over the years, we've seen many variants of this thing like Thwimps, Big Thwomps, and Grindle, which I'm kind of glad we haven't seen in a while. Yikes. But let's not forget the relatives of the Thwomps: Bombs, Flomps, Romps, Spiny Tromp, and the Stairface Ogres from Super Mario Odyssey, also known as Donsuke. This one's kind of badass, I love it. But I think the most popular relative would be the Whomps, introduced in Super Mario 64. These guys actually have legs though, so they can hunt you down if they so please. And when they find you, Batan. That's their Japanese name, by the way. But similarly to Thwomps, Whomps were inspired by Nurikabe, another yokai whose name translates to plaster wall. This creature is known to take the form of an invisible wall that would block travelers as they walked at night. So I'm pretty sure the correlation is pretty self-explanatory here. In fact, I'm sure many of these enemies that I discussed can be attributed to Japanese folklore if you look into it enough. I didn't try because there isn't much proof behind a lot of this, so this is speculation on my end, but for example, the Sumo Bros you can compare to Kenmun, a spirit that is known to like sumo wrestling and has the ability to create fire from the tips of their fingers. Or you can also compare Spikes, who I didn't cover in this list, to Kappas due to their frog-like appearance and the shell on their back. The similarities stop there, but it wouldn't be a stretch to think Nintendo was inspired by folklore when cooking up some of these enemies. Leave your theories in the comments below. Anyways, ladies and gents, that will cover the majority of Bowser's army. I know I missed several others like Wigglers, Buzzle Beetles, and Blarg. I know my Blarg fans are absolutely raging in the comments, but I just got to the essentials. But if you like videos like this, I wouldn't mind running through a list of enemy types and different game franchises that I cover, so please let me know. But with that said, I'll be taking another break from Mario content and finally stepping into the land of Hyrule as we tackle the origins of Link. This is an intimidating one for me, so I'll see you guys on the other side of that project. And as always, be safe. The Prophet has spoken.